podcast is powered by PKF. PKF, your trusted advisor in the hunter for over 45 years. Down to Business acknowledges the traditional owners of the land and waters this podcast is recorded on.
Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Down to Business. I've got a superstar with me today. I've got Mr. Garth Russell, who's known to many around, especially around the Newcastle Hunter, region, but even beyond there. He's a bit of an intro. He's a wellbeing and communication coach, an interviewer, a storyteller, so I better be on my game here today, and an actor, which I'm not, so you can probably tell. But more importantly, he's currently Managing Director of GenWise and Wellbeings & Co. You've got a great story to tell, so welcome, Garth.
Thank you, Andrew. Great to be here. Superstar, mate. No pressure.
Oh, hey, the bar's pretty low around here, so mate,
okay,
you're on
call.
fire.
Good call.
I think I've gone through a bit of a very high level, bit of an intro and background, but mate, you got a very interesting story. And, with all due respect, been around for a long time.
Yes, that's obvious. Yeah,
but where did it all start? Maybe give us a bit of a background on the story that is Garth Russell.
Yeah, look, and I guess as you go through life, you try and piece it together for yourself sometimes and think, why have I ended up here and why am I focused on what I'm focused on and continue to be all these years? Look, I go right back to my childhood as a kid who wanted to be an actor from my earliest memories. A dad who was incredibly inquisitive, although it was interesting, my dad was a real bloke and played every sport under the sun when he was younger, and I was his firstborn, and I think he was hoping I'd follow in his footsteps in a sporty kind of way. But I was this skinny little asthmatic kid who, at the age of 6, could sing just like Julie Andrews from Mary Poppins, which filled my dad with so much pride, jokingly. But the really interesting thing is where my dad and I really connected was an actor's mind I worked out is all about being fascinated by people and trying to understand the human experience. And Dad just happened to have that same interest in people from a very early age for him. So he was an insurance salesman who just got people, was incessantly curious about people, about the world. So I think I put those two things together and realised that sort of set me on that path of going, what are we about? What makes us tick? What makes us behave the way we behave? What stops us from doing the things that we ideally do to make us well? So all through life, it's kind of been wrapped up in stories.
I think
that's that fascination with
stories. It's a great
stories.
point. In our own business, the guys get sick of me saying it. It's that we're a people business, and it is. It's whether you're selling product, it's whether you're giving advice. It's like at the end of the day, it's people dealing with people.
Yeah.
And on this series of talks, we've had originally start out with advisors and then business owners, but I think it's just generally people that have been successful, and that's got could be different measures what success is, but they're good with people and relationships.
Yeah, and I guess we use that phrase more and more these days, soft skills, which kind of I think sort of it doesn't do it justice. I think it's just people skills, and I think more and more post-COVID, more and more we're just trying to hone those skills more because they're, as you said, at the end of the day, they're the foundations of what makes a business work, what makes a life work. It's pretty basic.
And I'll grab you on that point before I forget it. Do you think that, you just said you've in different walks of life and now you're actually consulting to businesses and the like, which we'll get to, but do you think that people skills, which seems common sense, is actually getting worse?
Yeah, I do. And look, I see it in daily life. I think, and I thought about before we caught up today, the simple message, and I think anyone can make things complicated, but to simplify the message, I think we've lost the art of being curious. And that takes me back to my childhood. I'm lucky that I grew up in a household that encouraged that, and I don't say that makes me better than anyone else, but I realised I had that ingrained in me from a very early age, and I think we live in a world for all sorts of reasons. It's harder to show pure curiosity because, well, we can go through some of the reasons, but Some of them are distractions. Some of them are the fact that we see curiosity as not being important enough. But to me, if you're curious, you're going to listen. If you listen, you're going to understand. And if you understand, then maybe you can empathise. And I think if anything's come out of this post-COVID world, people are starting to go, okay, we've got to start getting back to the basics. And I think we're struggling with that for all sorts of reasons.
I couldn't agree more. Like, I mean, we've had this big push on, flexibility in the workplace, and that's a very positive thing. But at the same token, you got people that are happy to go and lock themselves in their house and work from home, and we lose that connection. Therefore that ability to be curious, as you put it. But I find with the technology trends, and especially I've seen my children and that sort of thing, it's becoming a lost art for something that when we were all younger, you had to do it. If you want to see if your mate was home, you had to jump on your bike or go for a walk. It's a real challenge. And it's quite scary.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you said, I think COVID, in some ways, it caused us to sort of find that hermit in ourselves. And look, I struggled from it as well. After the couple of years of disruption, it took me a while to get back into the swing of connecting with people face to face. I was a bit rusty to start with, and yet I'm someone that's sort of thought I was a natural connector. But I think the other thing I think that's happened, and we've talked about, and I'm sure we can use the word bastardise. I think the well-being space has been muddled for that reason. And I think there are lots of people that have come out of it going, okay, this is what well-being should look like, could look like. But I think basically it's got to come back to the relationship we have with ourselves, working out what we need, and then deciding how we can match that with the people we either live with or work with. And it's a two-way thing. And I think what's happened in the workplace, I'm seeing a lot of onus on the employer to make the employee happy. But you've got to come together. It's got to be a bit of both. We've got to be working on ourselves to go, okay, what floats my boat, but how does that then contribute to the family, to the community, to the team I work with? It's got to be it's like any relationship. It's a two-way thing.
Yeah, mate, I couldn't agree more. Anyway, that could be spoken about for days.
Yes.
But, so you said you got here on that basis of, I guess, curiosity and people.
Yeah.
But you've been through, you've had the radio career. We mentioned acting, etc. Take me a bit through, I guess, the vocation type stuff and what led you to where you are now.
Yeah. Well, it was interesting. A meeting I had with you and Steve Main recently. I sort of was thinking way back, even prior to acting. So radio. I got into radio as a 25-year-old. But when I left school, because I couldn't think of anything else to do, I got into retail, and I was fresh out of high school. I was asked by Grace Brothers, a department store in Sydney where I worked, if I wanted to be a retail manager and do a cadetship, which I did. And by the time I was 20, I was actually managing a small group of people. But they were people of all ages, 18-year-old my age, casuals. There was an ex-business owner. There was a mum who just got back into the workforce. So pretty early on, I had to go, okay, how do I manage these people's expectations, what they want to get out of work? How do I get the best out of them? I didn't realise I was doing that at the time, but that's basically what I started doing. And then out of the blue, I had the opportunity to look into radio, which as a 25-year-old, as I said, I did. Loved it because I think there was the element of performance in that, so that sort of fed the actor in me. So that started a career that only really wrapped up 4.5, 5 years ago, so pretty much almost 40 years, predominantly radio, but in amongst that there was a desire to be a better presenter, to be a facilitator, to do some MC work. And then finally at the tender age of around 38, I finally had to go at acting. Certainly didn't do it full time, but did some, learn to act in front of the camera.
Broadway or something like that?
Not quite Broadway, no, not quite Broadway, but I did do Home and Away, All Saints, a bit of Water Rats, always. And my now 35-year-old son thought it was hilarious. I was always cast, or more often than not cast, as a detective. And my son used to look at me going, mate, you're so not a detective. And I said, well, that's character acting, buddy. That's what it's all about.
Fake it till you make it.
Yeah, that's it. But it was lovely because as a kid, that's what I wanted to do. And I remember being on set a few times just going, this is just gold. This is exactly where I want to be. The reality was I left it probably a little bit late and certainly didn't want to live with the bum out of my pants, struggling to get the next acting job. So I'm still to this day happy to have an agent, still have opportunities to go for stuff. It's a bit like fishing. You throw your line and you get a couple of nibbles, and every now and then you land something, and that's just enough to feed that creative part of me. But it also feeds into that, as I said, the storytelling stuff. It's all storytelling.
And I guess, you know, with a lot of this, it's I mean, whilst you'd look at it from afar and go, it's in the same sort of realm or area. I mean, it's pushing yourself out of your comfort zone a fair bit.
Yeah.
I know you said you had a desire, but is that desire what drove you, as opposed to, you know, we see so many people that are just happy to sit and be safe and have regrets, I guess.
Yeah, look, it's interesting, and I've taken lots of risks with my career as well. So, you know, I left a comfortable job at the ABC to start up this life recording business that I started in 2010. And I remember the manager at the time saying, okay, you've had this idea, but do you want to stay with us for a year while you're working your business up? Now, anyone sensible would go, sure, I'll do that. But I felt that I wasn't going to do the ABC or my new business justice by doing half and half. So I jumped ship, learned how to use a camera. I knew how to interview people, but I didn't know until I sat with a stranger for the first time, you know, this lovely grandmother, as I remember, and just managed to get her confidence and have her comfortable enough to tell her story on film on behalf of her family. And I thought, okay, there's something here. And once again, it was just feeding into my interest in people. So to this day, and I've gone back to doing more of that, but to this day, I never get sick of asking someone what it felt like to become a parent for the first time, or, you know, find that job that you always wanted, or, you know, what was your proudest moment? And it's still the actor in me that's going, okay, I'm taking that on board for somewhere else. Somehow maybe I'll use that someday. If not, the benefit is of the person that's sharing the story and the people that are going to listen to it.
And I guess, and again, we'll come back to the business in a minute, but I guess that ability to tap into what's important to someone else or their emotional side, you know, they say you might consider things with your head, but you make decisions with your heart.
Yeah.
Is that's really been, I guess, a crux or a basis of your business model?
Yeah, and it's I guess once again it's about helping people understand themselves. So whether it be a 90-year-old grandmother, or if it be someone I'd be doing some coaching with, the thing that works for me and I love is when I see the light bulb go on. And that just comes from asking the right questions. That just comes from leading someone down a path where they're answering their own questions. And I think I've said it to you before, I believe that 99% of the stuff that we need to know, we already know. We just need to be reminded. We need that space, and it comes back to that curiosity thing. It comes back to people being curious in someone else, to give them the space to go, yeah, that's what I just realised. That's what I've always thought, or that's why I did what I did. You know, Simon Sinek famously, you know, said, work out what your why is. And sometimes we need the space to work that out for ourselves, and it can change. You know, whether you're 20 or 65, sometimes it's worth revisiting that just to make sure you're still on the right track.
No, mate, it's a good point. I especially it's about the reminder piece. You know, I saw Patrick Lencioni in Sydney a few years back now, and it really struck home with me. You know, when you tell someone something and you think, why don't they get it? You know, or and he said, look, it used to be about 9 times you had to reinforce or repeat, you know, remind a message before someone actually had it sink in. You know, and I just think, geez, what about your kids? And you know, but then he said with technology and all the things happening, there's been studies showing now it's 15 to 18 times, and it's only getting worse. So, you know, we're in business. You think how many times you might say something once, twice, at a stretch 3 times, and you're wondering why you're not getting the result.
Yeah. I'm sure you've heard that there's one very simple ingredient in successful people. They're the people that read a lot. And sometimes they read the same book 5 or 6 times for that very reason. I'm going through Think and Grow Rich for the 4th time, hoping Yeah, it'll click in. It'll click in.
Well, mate, my one's how to win friends and influence people. I reckon I've done that 5 or 6 times.
That's a perler.
Yeah, and I'll tell that team, like
book.
it was what the 20s or something, maybe even earlier.
In the 30s, early
and,
30s.
and it's
Carnegie wrote that.
Still holds true because it's that people aspect you were talking about.
Yeah, and the story, and it's funny when I read a book, quite often from that book I'll get one really important message or one story, and the story I remember about Carnegie, paraphrasing it basically, was he went to a party once where no one knew who he was. I think it was a mate's party, and he spent the whole night asking people about themselves. All he said was, "Hi, I'm Dale. Tell me about yourself." And the feedback that he got via his friend after that party was, everyone thought you were the most fascinating person they'd met. They didn't know anything about him.
No. It's like when you go to a networking event, someone just asks you a question, well, wait, great person.
Yeah, you don't know a thing about them. You just know they're interested in you.
So, let's talk. You mentioned the storytelling business.
Yep.
So now you're in the position, it's all around people, so you're doing coaching and presentation skills and this life story.
Yeah.
So, it's all people-centric.
Yeah.
How have you been able to, I guess, and we might have touched on it a bit earlier, but taking that idea and that passion for, that people aspect and monetizing that?
Yeah, okay. So this is where at 65 I'm still working on that, to be quite honest. I've obviously been successful enough. I can still wear a jacket and I'm still paying the rent and all that sort of stuff, but it's been a challenge because the creative part of me is going, I really want to do that. Yeah, that's that I can see there's real benefit in that. The challenge continues to be, okay, how do I make a really profitable business out of that? And it's just been recently that I've come back into this, and it's really interesting. It's off the back of a website, which has really helped because it's given me a platform to rethink what is it that I really want to do, how much of those different things do I want to do, how much coaching do I need to do. So it's become more, finally I've become a bit more mechanical about, okay, how many of those coaching clients do I need to return a good return on my time? How many live recordings do I need to do? At what level? So it's still, to be quite honest, it's still a work in progress. I love doing it all, and I think I've done 2 jobs in my life that I didn't like, and I didn't do them for very long. So I've kind of sacrificed security sometimes for the sake of just going, this work, when I'm doing this, when I'm sitting listening to someone telling their story, it doesn't feel like work. Mm. So I've given myself that that opportunity, and yet I've had mates that go, I can't believe you left the ABC. I can't believe you getting back to that, leaving without any safety net. People look at me going, you are just so courageous and whatever,
Courageous, another word for idiot or something?
An idiot, yeah, you're an idiot. But I kind of admire you for it. I don't know why, but you've done it. And I think you get used to it.
Most won't.
Yeah. And look, I've got mates who are now at 65. They've done the same job. They've really worked hard. They've given it their all. But they're going, oh, man, I'm puffed. I got to retire. Mm. I'm at 65 going, what's next? How can I do this better? Or how can I, So... I've paced myself.
No, well, I completely digress for a minute, but I saw something online the other day of with the government lifting the retirement age or the working age, and there was a guy that's been a tradie all his life saying anyone that's making that decision has never worked outside, and you get it, don't you?
Totally, yeah. But I've also got friends that are now struggling to work out what it is, how they're going to contribute. How they're going to sort of make this tail end of their lives enjoyable. And so there's got its own sort of challenges either way.
So then I guess, as you said, you're quite happy with what you've taken on and you're in a pretty cool place at the moment. It doesn't feel like work. I guess a lot of people get, especially in younger age, told it's about education and that you're one shot. Well, you've probably bucked that, knowing a bit of your background.
Yeah.
Where do you place education? I don't say that flippantly because obviously if you're in a technical role or you're going to have some, but there's all forms of education,
yes.
And whether that be the formal versus reading everything you can, like you alluded to, or seminars or conferences, etc. But where does education rate against experience?
Yeah, look, I've got an interesting story. My youngest son, who's about to turn 18, went for a job recently, and it was a retail job. It was one that he was really after. Now Oliver, he's doing his HSC. He's got no great desire to go to university, and look, I'm fine with that. I didn't. I'm not saying it's a yes or no either way. I think it depends on the person. But the story that he came back with after he went for this job online, he did an interview. He was being asked by the person, what experience, what qualifications have you got for this particular job, which is kind of a stock standard question, whether you're 17 or 70. And Oliver just said, look, I see myself as an informed consumer. And I'm in the other room going, yes, go boy. Like, that's a great answer. I think it's about absorbing yourself. It's about immersing yourself. It's about the curiosity piece. It's about really learning, finding out what you're really into and just soaking it up. And we live in a world where it's so much easier to do that. You don't have to buy, the Encyclopedia Britannica anymore, like you had to in my day if you wanted to learn. I
was trying to tell my kids.
Yeah.
Kids, I still remember having them.
Yeah, there you go. There's so much we can learn that's so easy to get in touch with. What we're fighting against, though, whether you go to uni or not, or whether you sort of chase tertiary education or whatever, we're still fighting against all the distractions that take away from the focus that we need to give life. And for me, I spend a lot of time at home in my office trying to work out what to do next. So I'm not someone who naturally is disciplined and focused, but it's something we need to get better at. Decide what's important and really focus on it. If we change path, chances are we will, during our lives. But it's about giving that thing that you're focusing on, giving it your utmost attention. That's when you get curious. That's when you get something out of it. That's when you sort of start heading down a good path.
Which is, and not to pick on generations, but just naturally, as we alluded to before, with all the technology and social media and all that sort of stuff, it is becoming quite the skilled art to be able to concentrate. Yeah.
Well, once again, Oliver will say to us, he's encouraged us to encourage him to get off his phone, because we know that these things they're addictive. They get the dopamine flowing. They reward us in ways that don't necessarily do us any good, but they're really hard to put down. It's sort of almost you're surgically attached. So even Oliver said, look, I'm up for you to encouraging me to get off my phone. So that was music to our ears.
Then I guess I take out of that, it's funny from a father, from a friend, a mate, that sort of thing. I go, yeah, get off your devices. From a business advisor, you're going, that's what we need to target. So it's a real dilemma.
Yeah,
depending on what hat you're wearing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and the other thing is it's not just the information that we're being bombarded with; it's the negativity in that information. So for me, when I worked in media, and I'm glad to say I don't anymore, I had to have my head around. Well, I was compelled to have my head around what was going on. These days, I'll still watch the news, I'll listen to the news, but I have the luxury of going, well, if I can't do anything about that, I can let that go. And they say that, upwards of 90% of what we take in on a daily basis is negative.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, and one of the learnings and one of the things I love to share with people, and it goes back many years, is Stephen Covey's circles of concern and influence and control. And I think it still comes back to, okay, if I can't do anything about that, let's concentrate on what I can influence. And in the middle of all that is what I can control, and basically that's me.
It's quite. You're absolutely right. I don't watch the news that much for that reason. I made a conscious decision about that some years ago. And I still get my updates, read the Australian Financial Review every day, etc., etc. There's still ways around it, but I think the mainstream media, they sell negativity.
Oh, absolutely.
There's plenty of good going on, but do you see much of that? And not to go on that rant, but I guess the part that I look at, to your point, you'd be quite a low percentage of people that can actually decide, I can't do anything about that, move on. Most people is exactly what it's praying at. So,
yeah,
like it's a hard one.
yeah, yeah. Well, we were hardwired to be concerned. You go back, tens of thousands of years, and we had to be concerned about everything around us because that's what kept us alive. We've got that same genetic trait in our heads, in our brains. We just have trouble discerning what's going to kill us from what is just news that is troubling.
Yeah, and I think if I bring that back to the business owner, and I often look like, when we talk SWOT and strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats, strengths, weaknesses, internal can control, opportunities, threats, external can't control. If you really want to make an impact, it's to focus on that stuff you can control. And if anything, less is more.
Yeah, and sometimes you just got to write it down. That's why those circles are great. Because we encourage people to actually fill that circle. What all those things that can concern you, the weather, what's happening in Ukraine, stuff. And then you go, okay, but what of that can I really control? And you bring that into your circle of influence, and you expand the circle of influence, and suddenly you feel like, hey, I'm feeling better about things. I'm not taking in all that stuff that I really can't do anything about.
It's funny, but you like people. Some people do think they can control the weather. We'll leave that one. But
yeah, please.
So we've spoken about people, and let's spin it on relationships. Now, not just from a point of view of when you were in different roles, but even more so, I guess, now as a business owner and taking control of your own destiny. How is the importance of relationships, and what does that mean to you?
Well, I know this sounds a bit sort of, I think it starts with the relationship I have with myself, and I think that comes down to a bit of awareness and making sure that I'm doing the things that are good for me, making sure that that self-care piece, that self-management piece is in place. And I'll give you an example. When I went back, I was asked by the ABC to go back and do breakfast radio at the tender age of about 57. Now, I did breakfast radio, admittedly it was crazy commercial radio, back in my 30s. So the spectre of me actually having to get up at 3:30 in the morning and perform every day, Monday to Friday, at 57, I know what it did to me when I was younger. It wasn't easy, and I sacrificed a lot. I won't go on about it, but it was, I gave up a lot, health and all sorts of things to a point. So I thought, okay, I'm keen to do this, but how am I going to do it differently? And I made it my mission to just about every morning, I'd get up a little bit earlier at 3:30, which I know sounds crazy, and I'd meditate. I'd spend 10, 15 minutes just getting myself in the right headspace, and then in the afternoon I'd spend maybe half an hour, maybe 3 out of 5 days doing some exercise. When I got off, I did breakfast radio, my last stint on radio for 3 years. I can honestly say at the end, I was fitter than when I started. My relationships with my wife and my kids were as good as ever, whereas they weren't so the first time around, to be quite honest. And I came away going, okay, I gave that a consistent effort. My level of energy was consistent. It was as much as I'd ever enjoyed radio before. And it was just 2 simple things I did most days that took all up, I don't know, not even an hour. And it was, the outcome was completely different. So for me, that was the relationship with myself. I think the other part of a relationship, to really simplify it, whether it be an employee-employer relationship, whether it be a husband and wife, whether it be parents and kids, is staying away from that belief that someone else is going to make you happy. And we're seeing it in the workplace a lot more now, I understand, because there's more onus on the employer to go, okay, let's create the environment. But it's got to be a two-way thing. It's like saying to a romantic partner, I'm going to get together with you, but I expect you to make me happy. We've got to come together. We've got to understand ourselves better, and then we've got to find that common ground of expectations, teamwork, the soft skills. We've got to really work, getting back to what we talked about. We've got to work on those things that feed us and have an agreement that we're all going to work in that environment.
It's a very, very relevant point. And I think, off the back of, again, we keep coming back to COVID, but I think what we're seeing within the Australian economy and the employment landscape, for instance, how hard it is to get people. And that two-way street just goes out the window because it's employers going, oh, what have we got to do? How we've got to bend. And I mean, at the end of the day, you've got to respect what you've created here and what you're providing for people, and expect the same back. Otherwise, it's a short-term win, not a long-term win.
And it's so much about intention. I think sometimes people go, well, unless we get this 100% right, what's the point of trying? But if people understand that the intention is there, and let's work on this together, that becomes then teamwork. That becomes an aspiration that both, if you put it employer and employee, both work out together, and that becomes a really positive,
good
process.
So then, link into relationships, and a big part of what you do in your business is communication. Yeah. I always ask people, what does communication mean? Because people think it's just verbal, but most communication we have these days is probably emails and text and that sort of thing. So how does communication play out for you, I guess, in what you do, but also within your business?
Look, I think once again it comes back to listening. I think, whether you're selling something, whether you're trying to create a relationship, whether you're whatever it is, and I love that saying, that really simple saying that smart leaders speak last. I think communication really is about listening. Someone's got to take the line, but that's the starting point. And once again, coming back to being curious, I think it. And look, there are all the technical sides of community. There's the verbal, there's the the physical, but it's being open to a conversation and a discussion. There are so many nuances in that, but really it's about connection. I want to connect with this person, and I'll do everything I can to make that connection work. And sometimes that means being the driver of that connection, but generally it comes back to that connection's got to start with an interest, a curiosity, an ability to listen, to understand. And look, I saw it, we all saw it in COVID. We saw that inability to communicate effectively on how people felt, for instance, about the vaccine. So we ended up falling in one of those two camps. You're either an anti-vaxxer or you're totally into the vaccine. Yeah. And if you were one or the other, particularly if you didn't want to take the vaccine, suddenly you were demonised and told you were evil. But how often did people stop and go, okay, why is it really important? Once again, we just didn't give ourselves the time to do that. And once again, the media drove that. The media sort of put us in two different camps, and we're seeing, I don't want to get political, but it's not political. It's, the Voice is the same thing, the Voice to Parliament. There's this, we live in a world where there's this big divide. You're in one camp or you're not. And communication is the link between those different opinions. Mm. So to me, communication is about connection. It's about understanding. And you could spend hours and hours talking about the different types of communication, but that's the overriding.
But it's also where the opportunity is, as you said. And I think, if I look at businesses generally, especially SMEs, what training do they give, if any? There'd be so many that don't have any training going on. There'd be others that have training, but it's all, let's call it technical, or linked to what they actually do. But the reality is that soft skills you referred to before, which communication is one part of, I think people just go, oh, they should just get it, or it's just obvious. But it's not. Yeah. And it's probably where the big wins and probably easier wins are there to be made.
Yeah. And you talked about education earlier. I think any parent who has a child at whatever age they are now, whether they're a teenager or they're one, I think it's hoven on us as parents to really encourage our kids to be good communicators, because the alternative is, in a world that, we're talking a lot about AI now, and obviously that sort of stuff. I think young people that come through that have got a better understanding of what it means to communicate and connect with people and have relationships, they're going to be streets ahead.
Mm. Oh, I couldn't agree more. Well, you think about it like this. I mean, our industry, accounting, we keep getting told, AI is going to be a game changer, and it will. The reality is relationships and communication will never change.
No.
If you want to be that trusted advisor, you need to use AI to your advantage.
Absolutely.
And there'll be so many industries like this, but how many people just put their head in the sand?
Yeah, and the potential is you let AI drive you, and that's not going to be a great outcome. So I think we've got to start making those decisions now.
Very good. So you mentioned well-being, and yeah, I agree with you. It has been bastardised. It's just it's when you're on a good thing, let's ride it, eh? But what does well-being mean? I guess because a lot of people hear it, and I think they hear it so much they just turn off to it.
Yeah,
Yeah. But what does it mean, especially in light of what you've just said about people? Now you've covered some of this, but let's delve down a bit more and how it can be applied in business.
Okay, so business story to share. My wife and I kicked off Wellbeings & Co. at the end of 2019. At the end of 2019, Suze was the educator of 25 years. I was the communicator, presenter. So together we went, let's go out and do workshops and presentations. Then the world said in March 2020, let's not. So we went, okay, there's our business model down the gurgler. And we went, okay, well, let's go online. Let's build some online programs. Now, the great thing about that was it gave us something to do. It wasn't bringing us any money in, but it gave us something to do and something to work towards. And it, for us, really crystallised what well-being to us was. As I said before, anyone can complicate something, but we went, okay, let's get a bit deep and then come back and go, let's simplify it.
Yeah.
So what we decided to do, and look, we weren't the people that invented this, but we just looked at well-being foundations and the really simple ones, and I won't bang on about it, but it's your emotional, psychological, your physical, your spiritual, your social, and then we found out your financial, because so many people that were struggling then and are certainly struggling now, it's their financial, you know perfectly well, it's their financial well-being that was overriding everything. And these different versions of it sort of all interrelate. And the reason we brought them up is it's a measurable thing. So for someone to be asked, okay, where do you reckon you are between 1 and 10 when it comes to your physical well-being? That's pretty easy to judge if you're prepared to be aware, and sort of you've still got to get that awareness piece. You've still got to be prepared to step back a bit and go, okay, where am I? Then you can work on it a bit. It's kind of it's a wheel, but if you can start sort of filling those parts of it, work out for you what it is. I think when it comes down to it, so much of it is around self-care, starting with yourself and making sure that you're filling those foundations for yourself. So I'll give you another example of what I discovered. Once again, this is a time when I left radio and I thought, okay, what am I going to do about connecting with people? Because when I'm on radio, that was my connection. Even though I couldn't see my audience, you sense they're there. I thought that's going to be a big hole if I let it be. So I didn't realise I was doing it. What I decided was I'm going to connect with a bunch of guys that swim down at Merriweather Baths every Saturday down the road here. Right through the year, we call ourselves the SEALs. You don't wear a wetsuit. If you're lucky, you wear a bathing cap and Speedos and goggles, and that's it. So I got to know these guys. I've been doing it now for 5 years. They've become really great mates. And before I realised it, I was kind of feeding into all those foundations of well-being. So just to tick them off, it was like the physical, the emotional and the psychological. I was getting a lot of support from these guys just by turning up every week. We just sort of formed these friendships. Obviously, your social. Financial probably didn't bother me because it didn't cost me anything. And even the spiritual, because I challenge anyone to do that first lap in 14-degree water and swim that first lap to the end of the baths. And every time I do it, I stop and I just look at maybe the sun coming up through the mist, take a big deep breath, stop shivering for a moment and go, wow, there's something going on. There's some connection I've made deep inside that's fed. So I kind of thought that's something I do and then we talk rubbish, have a coffee, talk some more rubbish, and then about 8 o'clock, 8:30, we all head off home. So once again, that's probably about a 2-hour exercise that if I don't do it, I really miss it. And so for me, well-being is about creating habits. It's about looking after ourselves. It's about the oxygen mask on the plane, looking after yourself and then putting the mask on the people around you and just growing it out from there. And that's where it's simple. And that's where, and we've talked about it before, if you do something that's good for you habitually, it's amazing how much more the rest of your life is going to flow. How work is going to be easier, how your relationships with your family and your friends and your community. And I just think, it takes, as I said, a bit of awareness. It takes getting uncomfortable sometimes. It takes a commitment, but it's universally successful.
And when you talk through that, and I'm just listening, that stuff's been around forever.
Oh,
and
absolutely.
It's stuff that we know of, but all of a sudden we've labelled it and made it something that we've just bastardised. You nailed it. So, but some of those fundamentals is bringing back to again when we were younger. It's just mates,
we just
wasn't
did it. Yeah, we're on our bikes. We're busy. We were catching up with each other, having a laugh. We just we just did it intuitively. But we get older and we get caught up in busy life and all those things we feel or think we should be doing that are at our detriment, when really what we should be doing is blocking our time. And we often say self-care is anything but selfish. I know that's a line, but it's so true. I think we're selfish when we're not looking after ourselves. I think that's how it plays out.
Excellent, mate. We could, put out a whole series just on that, I think. But given your time, we'll talk now more about your business.
Okay.
So you've had to go from an employee, where employees are very valuable, but you're not actually running the show, responsibilities. Now you are running the show. What are some of the habits you've had to develop, or some of the behaviours you get into to run your business?
Yeah, look, I think what I've had to do, and this has been a struggle sometimes, because sometimes you don't feel like, I know this sounds strange, I'm one of those introvert extroverts. So if you leave me alone for long enough, I'll just sort of go a bit quiet. I've had to be really mindful of getting out there, connecting with people. When you're alone, a lone operator, I've just found the connections in business really important. So the business breakfasts, the connecting. I know they talk it is networking, but it is just creating those relationships. And I really missed it when I wasn't. And then when COVID kind of sort of petered out a bit, I think I said before, I found it really hard to get back into it. This feels like small talk. I was really rusty. So I've made sure that I stay in touch with people, I connect with people, I text people, just to say hi. I think in this world where we're all sort of going, what are you trying to sell me? I think that whole notion of just checking in with people, just simply, how are you travelling? Just a text or a messenger message, just, how are you travelling, mate? I'm just, and it's amazing, the more you do that, the more you realise you actually are interested. And someone said this to me the other day, I thought it was really funny. They said, sometimes I feel uncomfortable about asking people questions because I think they might think I'm being nosy. And I'm like, oh man, it's I understand it, but it's the last thing we should be thinking. It's the last thing we should be thinking, I don't want to ask them questions because they'll just think I'm prying.
Well, it's a funny, we use around here more on on some of the services, and they've got to be value adding.
Yeah,
like, they absolutely have to be value adding. Otherwise, you don't talk to people about it. But reality is, a lot of, I guess, younger or less experienced advisors will go, well, I can't ask that because I've never done it before. I go, that's the silliest thing I've ever heard. Because what we do know, and not egotistically or arrogantly, but people like talking about themselves.
Yes.
That's fact.
Yes.
So if you're asking the questions, it's a brilliant methodology.
Yeah. So I'm a great believer in just reaching out for the sake of reaching out. I'm a great believer in blocking time. I don't always, I'm challenged by that. There's a guy called Robin Sharma who wrote The Monk Who Sold His Ferrari.
Yeah, I've read all his
5
books.
a.m. Club. Yeah, you'd know him. He's really good at encouraging people to get really focused, because when we shut everything off and we give ourselves an hour or 2 hours to just really focus, it's amazing what we come up with. It really is. So I've got better at doing that, and that's working at home. So sometimes I don't know if people can relate to this. You'll be in the middle of something and you hear the washing machine downstairs go off. I probably should get those clothes out, which doesn't sound very professional, but But sometimes working from home is like, my partner's away, working full time somewhere at the moment. I've got to contribute, but it's just about discipline. It's going, okay, I'm going to give myself an hour to work this out. Another really interesting thing, and journaling is great. I heard this great advice once about a great question to ask yourself is, you've got a problem or you've got a task in front of you. How can this be easy? To ask yourself that question gets the old computer going, because we love asking ourselves questions, because it starts focusing on a solution, on an outcome, and I found that a game changer. If I've got a task in front of me and I'll start, how can this be easy? And straight away I start going, okay, and it's the answers start coming.
Yeah, brilliant.
It's a really good thing to do. For people that like journaling, it's a great way to start any journaling, because it just sets you on this path of, okay.
You just need to be careful how much you talk to yourself.
Well, there's don't worry, that concerns me a lot.
Okay, so with such a, I guess, a wonderful background, what are some of the, what's some of the biggest mistakes, I guess? Which, I don't say mistakes as in a negative, because I've made a career out of mistakes, but that your biggest lessons, I guess, out of those mistakes.
Well, once again, staying focused. I think when you pick storytelling as a career, that's pretty broad. It's a little bit like well-being. That's pretty broad. So and I did it recently. It was really funny. I was at a wedding recently, and I had a couple of people come up to me and go, "Mate, you know what I reckon you could do?" And they were successful business people, so I sort of gave them a bit of time. And I went, oh, yeah. And I literally started down that path, started making inquiries. And my wife, Sue, said, what are you doing, Garth? I said, well, I'm working on this version of what. She went, no, just stop. So I guess if the things I've been done, it's that desire to try and help everyone and just scattergun. And yet you hear time and time again, it doesn't feel natural, but time and time again, it's about niche marketing. It's about going, okay, how can I help that small group of people, and then maybe expand from there? So if there's mistakes I've made, it's like chasing the shiny object for all the right reasons. It's not like, I'm doing it for the right reasons, but it's just it's focus. It's lacking focus. It's like, bring it back. So yeah, that's one of the things I've done.
Yeah, it's a great point. I think a lot of that from people is driven off that whole concept of, there is abundance, but they don't look at it from abundance, always trying to get there sooner or find the easy way or whatever it may be for many.
And I know this sounds almost contradictory, but I spent a lot of time getting Jeff McCloy's story a couple of years ago, and I was just soaking that stuff up. I found that fascinating on many levels, personally, professionally. And I asked him one of his, came out in conversation about one of the things he's always been big on, and it's about connecting the dots. So it's kind of being expansive in your thinking, but it's still bringing it back to the pointy end. So, all the overseas traveling he's done, he looks at architecture. This is an example, and he goes, "How can I bring that to my to the residential developments? How can I bring that to the front, the positioning? I'm trying to think there's a name for it, but it's basically the statement. It's the piece that people see when they drive through into their new sort of places. So for him, that's an example of joining the dots. Just stuff he sees, he just brings it down to how can I make that very specific, sort of business. How can I make it better just by taking everything I observe and just funneling in what I do? So it's an interesting,
good point.
It's an interesting point, yeah.
So that being the case, what's the best advice you've ever received? Hard question, I know.
Yeah, it is. I think it's. Look, I know I'm repeating myself, but I think it is that we're encouraged to get up every day being passionate, which I don't think is sustainable. And if we're not, we feel like we've failed. I think it came from my dad, and I think it keeps coming back to me. It's just, if you can wake up every day and be curious, and I know I'm repeating myself, but I think it comes back to that. Because it covers so much. It covers people, it covers ideas, it covers creativity. So I still think that's the best advice I've I've ever been given is just concentrate on being curious. There's lots of ways you can do it. That'll be for another chat, but it is something we can learn and something we can get better at. It's not something we necessarily have to be born with. It is totally achievable to find ways to be curious.
You a Ted Lasso fan?
Do you know I still haven't seen it?
Oh, mate. I've converted that many people, but he's curious. So I think you'll
go.
like it. I think you'll like it.
I don't know why I'm leaving it so long, but I'm definitely going to see it.
Mate, before I bring a wrap up together, I guess, so what's the main website people go to? Check it out.
Well, Garth at garthrussell.com is the one that sort of leads people to what I'm doing, and then they can sort of get onto help Wellbeings and Co from there. But Garth at garthrussell.com is kind of it's probably the best representation of what I do that I've ever had. And that's another bit of advice I give. I know people are always going, "Oh, I'm tinkering with my website." I feel like I've got a website now that really, when people go on, they go, "Yeah, I get you." So I'm pretty confident.
Check it out, garthrussell.com.
Yeah.
Right, let's try and bring some of this together.
Okay.
So I guess, a big part of what drives you, and I think many people can learn from, is what are your dreams and stick to it. But dreams and passions, I guess, is the way to put about it. It's all about people.
Yeah.
Whether that be in whatever walk in life, but you build a business now, and I think many businesses can learn from this. Don't hide from it. Actually make people front and centre.
Yeah.
And be curious.
Yep.
Great bit of advice, be curious. You mentioned, education, there's various forms, but keep investing, and also experience and immersion. Best way to really start to get, I guess, a leg up, if you like, whether it be whatever business you're in.
Yep.
Discipline and focus, making sure what your task at hand is, put that focus on, get rid of the distractions. And I love what you said, and a lot of people who we interview on this have said something similar around the most important relationship, because of the plain example, is the self-care.
Yeah.
Making sure you give yourself that self-care. So many business owners, they go into business for lifestyle or time or more money or whatever it may be, and you see them, they're just stressed and not happy, and so that's gold. One of the biggest things that you think's a beneficial part of communication is listening.
Yeah. Simple as that. And I don't know how often, and I hate to sound judgmental about this, but I'll be out, and sometimes I'll sit there and and look, I'm a natural question asker. I've done it for a living, so I do tend to go in pretty hard. But there'll be times when I'll stop asking questions and I'll sit there, and then there's this what can be really awkward silence, and I go, and it's not a judgment, it's an observation. And you see, sometimes you'll see people on dates. Look, we've all been there. When you're young, you sit there. You either that, or you sit there awkwardly going, "Oh, I don't know what else to tell you about me." It's like, maybe just ask about them. Yeah. It's not rocket science.
Well, sometimes you think it is, mate. I love what you said about the 5 pillars of wellbeing, and wellbeing is just a brand, if you like. But and I'd encourage business owners to really look at that. You've got a website to go and have a look at, but more importantly, look at your own business and what you're doing there. And that part of it that you said about, it's a two-way street. And I think, especially in a tough labour market, we've all become about what can we give, what can we do more of, rather than sit there and go, hang on, this is a relationship. Connections, massive part of business.
Yeah.
And connections needs, what we mean, there's real connections. So have a look at your business and what are you doing in that space. And the final one I took out of what you just said, and there was a lot, but really actually block time out. I try to coach people in this space to say, don't just put meeting time in, don't just put, things you need to be at. Actually block out times to do stuff.
Yeah.
So that you respect your time and make it happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Did we cover all that?
Mate, we covered a lot. We probably covered more,
Wow,
but there you go. We've probably got another one to come in the future. But mate, look, hey, we could talk all day. It's absolutely a pleasure. Thanks for joining us on Down to Business, mate.
Thank you, Andrew. It's been great.
Guys, hopefully you got a lot out of that. Until next time, cheers.